Well, hey everyone, I'm Janet B. I've recovered from compulsive eating and bulimia, and I am just really happy to be here tonight. We are on There Is a Solution. If you have your big books, page 17. Okay, look at that topic. There is a solution. So much there. First, if you take it as a whole, like there is a solution, right? There is hope. And then there is a solution. So they don't talk about that there's 13 different solutions and they're all equal. There may be 12 other solutions out there, but this book is about one solution that they know will work. And if they're saying there's a solution, then that means there has to be a problem, right? That we have to define the problem. And our book defines it for us on page 45, lack of power. That was our dilemma. So the solution is going to be a way for us to access the power that we need so that we're not compelled, forced against our will by an illness to eat food in the quantities that are staggering to people who aren't like us, times when we don't want to, amounts that we don't want to, that we can't stop. There is a solution. So the chapter starts out and it says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous, or Overeaters Anonymous for us, know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. So they make a correlation between being hopeless and recovering. Well, why do they do that? Right? Like, why, if I go into the doctor's office and and I've got like bronchitis, the doctor doesn't grill me and say, are you sure you have bronchitis? Do you feel hopeless? Like if I don't give you an antibiotic, you're going to be, no, no. Why? Well, because what do I have to do for bronchitis? I have to take antibiotics for 10 days. Big deal, right? This program requires a lot of hard work. So this is what it says on page 23. It says of the AA 12 and 12. Since step one requires an admission that our lives had become unmanageable, how could people such as these, people less desperate because they could not make the admission of hopelessness, how could they take step one? And they say it was obviously necessary to raise the bottom the rest of us had to hit. By going back in our own drinking histories, we could show that years before we realized it, we were out of control. And to the doubters, we say, perhaps you're not an alcoholic, compulsive eater after all. Why don't you try some more controlled drinking, eating, bearing in mind what you now know about alcoholism or compulsive eating? So they are saying that if someone isn't sure, it is better to ask the person to go out and try some controlled eating, like go to Weight Watchers, get a food plan, see if you're able to stick to it. That's better than to start someone on the steps if they're not sure that they're hopeless. Why? Because if someone comes and they start working these steps with a sponsor and they're not willing to go to any lengths, which only happens, right, when we feel hopeless, then when it gets hard, right, when they have to do a fourth step, when they have to make a hard amends, when their sponsor tells them they have to be honest, they're going to say, the heck with this. This program doesn't work, and they're going to walk away. And they're going to think the program didn't work. They won't realize it. It's because they didn't put everything they had into it. Um, who is ever going to go through chemotherapy unless they have cancer and feel it's their only option? I know for me, this was the last stop of the train. And they say it right here in the AA 12 and 12. Who wishes to be rigorously honest and tolerant? Who wants to confess his faults to another and make restitution for harm done? Who cares anything about a higher power, let alone meditation and prayer? Who wants to sacrifice time and energy in trying to carry the message to the next sufferer? No, the average alcoholic or compulsive eater, self-centered in the extreme. Oh, that hurts, right? Self-centered in the extreme doesn't care for this prospect unless he has to do these things in order to stay alive himself. So if you're here and you're not sure you're hopeless, I guess the best thing I could say is get with someone who's recovered, who's worked through the steps, and have a conversation about it. And start talking about your patterns, and maybe someone can help you see it. And if you're not hopeless, That's great. You know, it says we have no monopoly on God. We merely have an approach that works. So they tell us the people who recover, what do they have in common? They were hopeless. They felt hopeless. And then they just say, we are average people, different political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. So it doesn't matter if we go to different churches, synagogues, mosques, or no place of worship at all. It doesn't matter if we're Democrat or Republican. It doesn't matter if we're rich, poor, somewhere in between, what our views are on how the country should be run, how the world should be run. It doesn't matter. It says we have something in common. We're like people who escape disaster together. So I think we all saw the movie Titanic, and we can imagine that the people who escaped the Titanic felt some kind of bond. It says, but ours goes deeper. That just escaping danger wouldn't have done it. Something else does it. And this is what it says. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. Okay, so we need to just kind of take note of that. They offer a common solution. So we should be asking, what is that solution? What is the solution? So that was at the bottom of page 17 in the big book, and I'm going to be only in the big book going forward. Top of page 18, it says an illness of this sort involves those around us in a way no other human sickness can. An illness requires outside intervention, right? When I had bronchitis, I needed an antibiotic. Someone who's diabetic, if has that illness, they need insulin. Someone who has cancer may need chemotherapy or radiation. Illnesses require an intervention. So that we need to see what's our intervention, what's our solution. So first we realize we have an illness. And they say, look at what happens with the alcoholic compulsive eating illness, for with it goes annihilation of all the things worthwhile in life. So if we think of everything worthwhile, like relationships, um, our friendships, forgiveness, all that gets annihilated, right? It says it, meaning this illness, brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, fierce, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, and then the saddest of all, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. But it says the illness brings this. This illness of compulsive eating is primary. These things are all illness symptoms. But we can't just treat the symptom, right? When I had bronchitis, if I had just taken cough medicine, I may have stopped coughing, but the bronchitis would have gotten worse and would have developed into pneumonia. We can't just treat the symptom. So again, we're looking at what's the solution. They haven't told us quite yet. And they say, we hope this volume will give you information and comfort. And they tell us, strangely enough, like really competent psychiatrists, our relatives, our close friends, find us unapproachable. For some reason, they can't help us. And they say, but the ex problem drinker or eater who has found the solution is properly armed with facts about himself. So we understand the nature of this illness and what it takes to get better, can generally win the entire confidence of another compulsive eater in a few hours. So we have to put in the time. It's not take 2 food plans and call me in the morning. We put in the time. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. We need to have a relationship. People cannot feel like projects, like you are my project, I'm going to fix you. People need to feel cared about. And as we go through recovery, the crazy thing is we start to really and truly care about other people. And then they tell us 9 things that should be part of a good 12-step call or a good meeting. That the man who is making the approach, 1, has had the same difficulty. I can relate to you. I used to binge too. 2, that he obviously knows what he's talking about. That we make sure we're giving our experience and then guidance from this book. 3, that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer. Now it says his deportment shouts. That means, his countenance, the way he talks. It does not mean that we shout at other people. We are not supposed to shout at our sponsees or our friends or our fellows or our husbands. We are not supposed to shout. But you're supposed to be able to look at someone and say, that person has an answer. 4, that he has no attitude of holier than thou. I'm not any better than anyone else. I may just have got on the recovery bus a couple stops before the next person. That's it. 5, nothing whatever except the sincere desire to be helpful. We just want to be helpful. 6, that there are no fees to pay. No, we don't charge a penny. Even when people offer money, we don't take it. No one has to pay for this. It's free. I had a sponsor who said, the day an angel shows up at my door with a bill from God on the silver platter, that's the day I'll start charging. God gave this to us for free, and that's how we give it. 7, that there's no axes to grind, that we don't sit there and say, oh, all those pay-and ways don't know what they're. No, if people get better at the pay-and ways, that's fine. We have no axes to grind. 8, no people to please. We don't put our sponsors on pedestals. We don't put other people on pedestals. We're in the business of pleasing God, not people. So that's what these steps teach us how to do. And number 9, no lectures to be endured, which is kind of ironic because you're all at a workshop, which could be called a lecture, but I'm using it in the terms of scolding. We don't scold other people. It says, these are the conditions we found most effective. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. That reference to taking up their beds and walking again is a New Testament reference to a miracle. That's all it is. And it says, page 19, none of us makes a sole vocation of this work. Again, we don't do it full time. Then it says, very interesting, we feel that elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. Y'all, when they say the elimination of our drinking is but a beginning, they do not mean you have to stop drinking or you have to stop eating for 48 hours or a certain amount of time before you can work the steps. They're saying, and to me, this is so beautiful. Okay, yeah, God has removed your food obsession. That's only the beginning. That's his opening act. There is so much more that this program offers. And it says, how do we really work this program? And they take it for granted. The food obsession gets removed, but watch out. How are you in your home with your family? How are you at work? How are you in your affairs? And they don't mean your affairs cheating on your spouse. They mean when you go to the drugstore and the clerk is a little cranky, do you get cranky back? How do you conduct yourself in the world? That's how we know the evidence that someone is in recovery, how they treat other people. And they say all of us spend much of our spare time in the sort of effort which we're going to describe. Much. So how do we describe much? How do we quantify that? I don't know, but I know that if we're watching as much Netflix as we want to, we're probably not doing enough service. Much of our spare time. And they say, okay, if we kept on going like this, we, the people who started the program, that'd be great. But how can we really help people? And they say, we'll write a book. We'll take our combined experience and knowledge, things we've learned and things we've experienced, and that this will suggest a useful program for recovery. This is a suggested program of recovery, but suggested doesn't mean part of it's optional. It means if you're going to do this suggested program of recovery, you're going to do all of it, right? When I had bronchitis and if the doctor said, you need to take cough medicine, you need to take antibiotics, and you need to use a nebulizer. And if I said, well, I'm good on the nebulizer and the cough medicine, but I don't like swallowing pills, so yeah, we're not doing the antibiotic part. I'd be back in 2 weeks with pneumonia, right? This is a suggested program of recovery. And it says, yeah, we're going to have to discuss medical, psychiatric, social, and religious things. And yeah, it may be controversial, but it's important. And then one of the most important spiritual principles, bottom of page 19. From day one, we can start practicing this. Most of us sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints and a respect for their opinions are attitudes which make us more useful to others. Our very lives as ex-problem drinkers, eaters, depends upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. Isn't that interesting? It doesn't say my life depends upon the perfect food plan, going to a certain number of meetings, making phone calls. Yes, and believe me, I tell my sponsees they have to do all of that. But our lives depend on thinking of others and how we can help meet their needs. So how do we do that? We can start really simply. Who are the others we are closest to? Our families, our colleagues, our friends, our neighbors, our fellows in recovery, and to think we can put our brains to it and think, what need does this person have? And then we can go about trying to fill that need. My husband has more of a need for a clean house than I do. So I clean because that's a way to meet his need. And then look what it says, what makes us useful to others, tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints. So that means whether I'm a Democrat or Republican, or you're a Democrat or Republican, if we're different parties, we tolerate each other's viewpoints. We may not agree, but it's okay. We have respect for each other's viewpoints and for other people's shortcomings. When I was preparing this chapter tonight, my husband was in the room and I'm like, and I said, I'm trying to think of a shortcoming of yours that I've had to have tolerance for, other than snoring, which isn't really a shortcoming. I'm like, I really can't think of any. And he said, oh, sometimes I roll my eyes. I'm like, oh yeah, you do. Sometimes I'll say, someone will say something, or he'll watch a newscast and he'll just like roll his eyes. And yeah, but it's like, I don't even notice it. And that's what we want to get to. Can you imagine a life where we don't notice other people's shortcomings, where we just don't notice that we're so intent on being of use and being helpful that we don't even know, or we don't even care. I mean, if my husband, yeah, he does roll his eyes. And so I usually just laugh. I'm like, oh, there you go, rolling your eyes again. But it made me really happy tonight that I couldn't sit there. He said, I could make a list of my shortcomings for you. And I'm like, but I can't make a list of your shortcomings. Um, I could make a list of mine. So again, the whole point is it doesn't matter if people have different views. Our life depends on thinking of others and how we can meet their needs. Okay, why? Why does our life depend upon it? Well, what is the root of this illness? In chapter 5, it tells us the root of this illness is selfishness and self-centeredness. So, because that's the root of my illness, I need to kind of do a root transplant on myself with God's help and start being concerned with others instead of myself. Thinking of myself so much is what got me so sick, I believe. And then they say, you may have already asked why it is we've become so very ill from drinking. In Dr. Bob's Nightmare, he said he thinks it's the selfishness engendered this illness. Dr. Paul, who wrote the story, Acceptance is the Answer, wrote another book. It's called something like there's more to not drinking there's more to not drinking than not drinking, or something like that. And in it he says God stamps every 10th baby an alcoholic. So basically they're saying we don't know. Yes, selfishness and self-centeredness plays a part in it. There's plenty of selfish, self-centered people who aren't addicts. So they say, okay, but if you are this, you're asking, what do I have to do? And it says, it is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. So they say they're going to tell us. And they say, but before we tell you, let's give you 3 examples, 3 different types of alcoholics. We'll put them in food terms. Actually, it's not 3 different types of alcoholics. It's 3 different types of drinkers: a hard drinker, a moderate drinker, and a real alcoholic. So, in food terms, a moderate eater would be someone who stops because they have a good reason. So, it's like my husband, maybe 20 years ago, the doctor said, Fred, you have high blood pressure. You need to lose about 15 pounds. So, he said, okay. So, he just like went on a diet, took the weight off. And it's like if we go on vacation and he comes back and he sees he gained a couple pounds, he'll just cut back for a few days and then he's fine. Moderate eater. I don't understand that. A hard eater is someone who is more progressed. And I believe that there's a lot of these people who are in Weight Watchers and in Overeaters Anonymous, and they are people who can get better by the structure and support and a food plan and the fellowship. But structure and support alone won't help a real compulsive eater. I believe that my first meetings I went to was filled with hard eaters. There were people who were lovely people who went to meetings and gave lots of hugs and, always took my phone calls, but they never said, Janet, you have to be honest. You have to get a proper relationship with God in order to recover. They didn't do that because they didn't need to. I think they were hard eaters. Lovely people couldn't help me. So they say the real alcoholic, or for us, the real compulsive eater, loses all control once he starts. So the question is like, why start? So they don't answer it quite yet. Page 22, they ask the question again, why does he behave like this? Why, if he knows that one will mean another debacle with suffering and humiliation, why does he take that first one? And here's what they say, page 22, last paragraph. Perhaps there never will be a full answer to these questions. Opinions vary considerably as to why the alcoholic reacts differently from normal people. Doesn't that just bother us, right? We want to know how we got this and why we got this. And here's why most of us want to know, because we want to know who to blame, and usually our parents. We don't have that luxury. And I don't remember, there's one of the stories in the back where the author says, I am not the way I am because of what happened to me. I am the way I am as a result of the way I reacted to what happened to me. There are people I mean, my sister and I had the same parents. She never had a problem with, compulsive eating. There are people here who've had horrible parents. There's people here who've had wonderful parents. We're all here. Why? What did we all have in common? Who knows? Maybe one day someone will write, a dissertation on it. It doesn't matter. They say it doesn't matter. We just want to know, what can we do to get better? They say we are people, when we take the first one, something makes it in the bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible to stop. Page 23. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. I have a friend, Elle. So her husband saw that if he had one glass of wine, he couldn't stop. So he decided that he would never again have even one glass of wine. He had the allergy of the body, right, that made him crave more and more, but he didn't have the obsession of the mind. So he could make up his mind to just stop. So it says, these observations would be academic, right? To Elle's husband, it's academic and pointless what happens to someone when they keep drinking and set the terrible cycle in motion. So our book tells us, therefore, the main problem, so the number one problem of the alcoholic or the compulsive eater, centers in his mind rather than his body. So the allergy is not the main problem. There's an allergy in most cases, but the illness centers in the mind, but it doesn't start there. See page 84, it says, once the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. This illness starts in the soul, in the spirit, and then just sets up command central in our mind and wreaks havoc on our bodies. So recovery really has to deal with all three. And it says, you can ask him why he started on the first drink, and he'll just give you excuses. He'll do one of three things: laugh it off, or become irritated, or refuse to talk. What type are we, right? What type are we? Do we make jokes about it? Do we get nasty, or do we clam up when people confront us? And it says, every now and then we tell the truth. And the truth is, we usually have no more idea why we took that first drink. We don't know. And it says there is the obsession that somehow, someday they will beat the game. That is the great obsession. The great obsession isn't food. The great obsession is that one day I'll be able to eat as much as I want without hating myself the next day, or be able to eat one and then stop. And it says, if the man is a real alcoholic or real compulsive eater, the tragic day may not arrive. Um, Top of page 24, really important sentences here. At a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. I think those lovely people in my first meetings, those lovely hard eaters, never read these sentences because they were thinking that if I couldn't stop, I didn't desire it strongly enough. But here it says we pass into a state, it's like we cross this invisible line. And once we cross it, the most powerful desire to stop is of absolutely no avail. We can't stop, no matter how strong the desire, no matter how great the necessity, we can't stop. And then they have that big paragraph in italics, so you know the broken bridge is coming. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. No choice. Well, how could that be? How could I have no choice, right? There's not a gremlin who takes my hand and shoves it into a bag of chips and makes me eat them all, right? What do you mean I have no choice? This is what it says. We've lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. So they are telling us that our memory is our defense against the first drink, but we don't have it because we can't bring the memories into our consciousness. So the way I look at it is like, here's my memories, right? And then here's my consciousness. And generally, there's a bridge that connects the two. So if I think about, like, I have terrible cat allergies. If I'm around a cat, I'll get sick. Like, that's just the only way to say it. So in my memory are all these data points of like a cat-induced asthma attack, cat-induced sinus infection, being near a cat and just getting sick. So if someone invites me to her house, I always ask, um, yeah, almost, do you have a cat? And if she says yes, quickly my memory scans the data points. You're near a cat, you got sick. You're near a cat, you got a sinus infection. You're near a cat, you had an asthma attack. Generates a thought to run across the bridge to my conscious mind to say, stop, danger. Cats will give you an asthma attack. My memory of cat-induced asthma attacks protects me. Okay. I grew up in Florida. What's the number one thing to do when you grow up, in Florida? You go to the beach. When you're 16 and you go to the beach and you think you know everything, what happens? You get sunburns, lots of sunburns. So in my memory are all these data points. You didn't put sunscreen on and you got a bad sunburn. You didn't put sunscreen on, your face was peeling, you were in pain. So I'm about to go to the beach. Oh, I don't really need sunscreen. My memory scans the data points, generates a thought to run across the bridge and say, stop, danger. You'll get a sunburn. You'll get all wrinkly. Don't do it. And I put on the sunscreen. So one would think that the same mechanism would work with food, right? I'll give an example. The example I always give: when I was in college, I would binge on these well, one of the things I binged on. Certain kind of cookies came in a box of 20. I would tell myself, I'm just going to have one or two. So stored in my memory are all these data points. You said you're going to have one or two, you ate a whole box. You said you're going to have one or two, you ate two boxes. You made yourself throw up. You couldn't get up the next day. Generates a thought to run across the bridge to my conscious mind to say, stop, danger. Remember, you won't be able to stop at one or two. Except unlike with cats and sunscreen, the bridge is broken and the thought can't get across to protect me. So that's why they can say in this book, our memories failed to hold us in check and we had no defense against the first compulsive bite. How did that bridge get broken? We don't know. Once we know that our problem is a broken bridge, can we rebuild that connection between our memory and our conscious mind? No. Unfortunately, no. Tried, didn't work. The only thing we can do is build another bridge, and that's a bridge to God. And that's what these steps teach us how to do. So, bottom of page 24, they say when this sort of thinking, like that I can have one and stop, or I can binge tonight, but I'll be able to stop tomorrow because I've got a magic pillow and 8 hours with my head on it will give me all this power I never had before. It says when this sort of thinking, addictive thinking, is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, right? The physical craving, he has probably placed himself beyond human aid. So I'm going to say, not coming from me, but coming from this book, and they use the same words, no return through human aid on the next page. The group cannot be our God. The group cannot be a higher power. Sometimes people might say, well, if someone can't believe in God, let them start out with the group as a higher power, and then they can graduate to it. Well, let's say I've got pneumonia and I go to the doctor and I don't like taking antibiotics. Is he going to say to me, you know what, start taking vitamin C? We'll start there because you don't like antibiotics. He's going to say, I'm sorry, honey, antibiotics are the solution. That's the only solution I have for you. And if you don't like it, I can't help you. They say no return through human aid. Top of page 25, they start talking about what the solution is. But for the grace of God, what does grace mean? Undeserved favor. But for the grace of God, there would have been many thousands more convincing demonstrations of alcoholic death. But for the grace of God, that is the solution. And they say there is a solution, God coming into our lives, the grace of God. Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of pride, the confession of shortcomings, which the process requires for its successful consummation. They're really telling me how to access the grace of God, how to access the grace and the power of God. If you think about it, like they use the word creator over and over in this book, that the creator, like the one who like flung the stars and decided where the planet should be, he's going to give me access to his power. That is certainly unmerited, undeserved favor. And how do I put myself in a position so that I can receive it? Self-searching, leveling of our pride, confession of shortcomings. And it says, we saw that it really worked in others, and we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we'd been living it. When therefore we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved. I love how they put that in the passive, right? I didn't solve the problem, it was solved for me. There was nothing left, right? I had no other options but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. A spiritual tool is something that helps connect my spirit with God's spirit. Spiritual tools. And look at the promise. Look what they say the result is of doing that. We have found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. So that term fourth dimension is used only one other time in the text section, and that's in Bill's story on page 8. He said, I was soon to be catapulted, love that word, like catapulted, into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. And here's how he describes it. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. We're rocketed, we're catapulted into a way of life that's even more wonderful as time passes. So, just like this illness was progressive, recovery is progressive. That's the solution. And now they expand on it. The great fact is just this and nothing less. So, if anyone tries to sponsor you, offering you less than this, don't settle for it. Says, this is it. The great fact is just this and nothing less. We have had deep and effective spiritual experiences. Effective, that means that it affected me. It was effective. It did its job and it changed me, which have revolutionized. I love that word. I just saw Les Mis again last week. Remember the revolution in that play? There, the good guys lose, but here, God wins. Revolutionize it. Our whole attitude toward life, well, that includes pretty much everything, toward our fellows, towards other people, and towards God's universe. And how do we know if we've had this? The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty. So we may start out an agnostic, but if we do these steps, we will come to an absolute certainty that our Creator, our loving Creator, has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. So miracles aren't like relegated to, Moses parting the Red Sea or things like that. Like that God enters into our hearts, says into our hearts and lives, or into our hearts and lives. Like God lives in our hearts in a way which is miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. Well, what's the first thing that I couldn't do for myself? I couldn't stop eating compulsively. Couldn't stop doing that. And that's what God does for me. That's the first thing he does. He helps with that. Then he helps us in our homes, occupations, and affairs, in our relationships. But he takes away the food obsession. And then they go on and say, if you are seriously alcoholic, compulsive eater as we were, there is no middle of the road solution, right? Making group higher power, making a doorknob a higher power, those are all middle of the road solutions. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible. And if we had passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid, right? No sponsors and our fellows can help us and give us good information that leads us toward God, but they can't give us power. And it says we had but two alternatives. One, to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could. In other words, staying in the food. And two, to accept spiritual help. This we did because we honestly wanted to and were willing to make the effort. And next week, we'll finish up on this chapter and go into more about alcoholism. So a deep dive into step 1. So I hope you all come back next week. And that's all I have for now.